right. I'll give a second for everybody to come in. So did you start out explicitly wanting to get into because it's like skip intro, so like Copaganda has become like your like your claim to fame, so to speak, but
I guess,
obviously you're still very much a media analysis guy.
Yeah, so I started with just doing TV. Well, I was gonna do whatever, but I started doing with TV stuff, and then when in 2020, when the George Floyd protests were going on, and I feel like everyone was talking about stuff that they could do or something, and I felt like very powerless, and I wanted to show like I kind of talk about it in the first episode of Copaganda, but I was trying to do some kind of something that felt more meaningful, as opposed to just like talking about the cool cinematography and Mr. Robot or something. So I wanted to try and do something, and I was like, I feel like what I could do is talk about the thing that I guess like surprised me about was like how much I was like my eyes were open to the police, and I was like, maybe like why I was trying to like be self-critical and figure out like why I was so surprised by all that, because there were certainly other people who were not as surprised.
Right.
And I started doing a lot of research, and I started going into and then that's how it started, I guess, and then it kind of took on a life of its own.
That's real, because somebody did a video when I started in 2020. I know you said you started before then and kind of like tried a lot of different things. I started in 2020, like literally, I think I dropped my first video around the 4th, like a little bit after the 4th of July of that summer of George Floyd's protests. And it was within the same sentiment, but also like with this air of frustration at how shallow the conversations were, and watching like every major corporation do a Black Lives Matter Instagram post, and it's like, oh, thanks guys, you guys are great. Like, and I'm like, all right, so what can I? And then the real origin story is my kids go to a school that's probably about 40% white, 40-50% white. And, they have a lot of white friends. So thus I've met a lot of white parents, and we're in like Facebook groups together, and they're all kind of like doing kind of I eventually called it like the liberal existential crisis.
Yeah. I remember the first video of yours I saw was the Bo Burnham one.
Yeah. That's the framing for that came from kind of observing parents of my kids' friends who were having this existential crisis as they were faced probably for the first time with like the true gravity, or they were unable to ignore the true gravity of, because they've seen it before, of like what's really going on with like racism in the country. And so like I started looking up a lot of videos, and that's one of my favorite videos that I lost in time, because you know how YouTube is with small channels. You may never, it may be yours for all I know. It was a video talking about how Black sitcoms have been telling the whole world about how we feel about the police since like the 80s. There's no shortage of whether it's A Different World, Family Matters. All these shows have had episodes where they may not land at prison abolition, right? But they're explicitly expressing the problem of policing Black people and Black communities. And so it's like I said a second ago, people have known this. This is not like, it wasn't new. It was just presented in a way that was impossible to ignore finally after however many years. Was that Renegade cut somebody? So if anybody can find it, if anybody can find that video, Maya the Aphrodite or Bellamy, if you can find that video, put that in the chat, and shoot that to me so I can put that out there whenever this comes out.
I think
so. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that as many shows are talking about, as many Black sitcoms are talking about that, as you're saying, there are so many more cop shows always. Like I think it was like in 2019, it was like 60% of primetime schedules were cop shows or like related to the law. So like Law and Order is cop/legal or whatever. But
Yeah.
so like, and I think that, I mean, growing up, I think that there's a lot of like segregation in audiences too. Like there's this idea that like black sitcoms are for not me. I don't know, like as a white person. I think that they were kind of like siloed away from me or something. I feel like I lost you there.
Yeah, I'm still here, but
Okay,
like
cool.
my cam is, I don't know what's going on with my camera. I think I'm just gonna change it. I have a new camera that finally has like a battery that can go forever, so I don't have to worry about my camera cutting off because the battery's low and the camera's just acting a donkey. I don't know. So go ahead.
I was just saying, like, there weren't a whole lot of like growing up. I was not exposed to as many like black sitcoms as I was cop shows, basically. So yes, I think that you're right. Like a lot of those shows were talking about that stuff, but I think there were so many more that were still kind of like implicitly upholding this idea that, you know, either that's just an issue for some people,
Right,
or that it's not an issue at all.
yeah, and that's definitely true. It's funny, I was who was I talking to? It probably was Bill, you know, or somebody posted something, and I made the joke that Obama ruined black televisions, but Obama ruined black TV and media, and that's hyperbolic, and that's definitely going to be a video if Bill doesn't get to it first. Hopefully, he's not in the chat. But before Obama, black TV was very segregated. It was. There are some shows like the Cosbys and Family Matters, which did cross over a lot. But like the average white person hasn't watched Martin and Living Color, Living Single, A Different World, all these other shows that are like fundamental to generally to like black millennial, at least youth experiences, where all those like conversations were happening internally. And then after Obama, you start to see like Blackish. You see a lot of black representation in The Office, you know, so you see like, so there's this integration because like suddenly there's a branding of blackness that has a audience among white folks in general.
It's kind of this like color blindness, right? Like it happens around the not to like point fingers at any specific like creator, but I remember this with like Michael Schur shows like The Office, like you said, and Parks and Rec is this show that's like very multicultural, but they never talk about race really that much or like talk about issues. I remember, oh geez, I can't remember who made this video, but they were talking about Tina Fey and the racism of Tina Fey. And
I probably know him too. That might have been Princess Weeks, but I'm not sure.
I don't, maybe, yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's been covered, but there was like this, I think, around the like late 2000s, there was this kind of idea that we had like, I think amongst like white liberals, this is like when I'm coming into adulthood of we've solved it. Like racism's not a thing anymore. 30 Rock is like very fine making like very off color racist jokes. I think there's like 4 different blackface episodes of 30 Rock, which is just a bananas number that they pulled off in 2020. Yeah, T1J. It is T1J.
Yeah. Shout out to my evil twin.
Yeah. So like, I think that there was just this idea that it was like, oh yeah, no, it was a joke on 30 Rock consistently that like that racism still exists even though Barack Obama is president, but then like structurally as a show, it's like a pretty, I like 30 Rock. It's got a lot of really great jokes and it makes me laugh, but there are a lot of pretty cringy moments too, you know? I mean, cringy is one way to put it, I guess.
No, it's real. It's hard to go back to any media. I'm releasing a video on a rapper on Monday that was like for like my late teens, early late teens was like the greatest thing ever to me in hip hop. And like what immediately fell out of favor. And then even going back, I'm like, what was I thinking? And that's like that's aside from like the open homophobia in hip hop and hip hop, especially of the time. Like now it's still there, but it's much watered down and it's been made more palatable.
Yeah.
But like like it's hard to get my kids. My kids are very rude to hip hop because like they're like, Daddy, why is there so much cursing? Why are they talking about women like that? And I'm like, well, I'm teaching you the opposite of that, but this is really entertaining. And then like we're not gonna have that conversation. Yeah,
is there a whole scene like that in Us, where he's like trying to teach them
I got 5 on it.
Yeah.
It's a weird dichotomy of it, trying to explain, and this will bring us back into Copaganda, trying to explain the validity of art not being okay, right? Yeah. Being problematic, offensive, and still good and desirable. And so coming back to Spider-Man, I went live with a bunch of Cornbread Tube folks, and most of us kind of agree that this was like either the best or worst Copaganda ever in a movie.
Yeah, it's hard to tell.
Yeah, it's like it didn't feel like, it wasn't as easy to point out. And so it was so skillfully done, in that it either doesn't count or it's the most dangerous like new version of it ever. Because what it does is, like when you talked about earlier, like 60% of daytime TV is cop shows, is because the concept of the mythologized police officer, right? That mythologized concept is amazing for storytelling.
It's so good. Yeah.
It's so good. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, how can you not engage in that?
And especially now, like it's so recognizable. Like you can, if you're just like flipping through channels, you see a cop show, you can, like, you don't have to look at the clock. You know exactly what part of the story they're in. Like it lends itself so well to procedurals, because different case of the week, there's the catch the bad guy at the end. You get to inject some kind of like current events that make it feel relevant. Yeah. And you just run it back again next week, and you can just keep doing that over and over again. And that's what TV is about.
The way Dick
at
Wolf,
some level, like it's just about pumping out content.
Yeah, the way Dick Wolf has a whole era of my young adulthood, like the way me and my wife bonded, my future wife at the time bonded every night after work with no kids, watching 3 episodes of Law and Order in a row until we fall asleep on, I guess, probably TNT.
Yeah, sure.
It's like, and it's amazing TV, and let alone everything else. I think about like the 80s and 90s action movie phase, where the feds and the CIA were heroes.
I mean, they still are in a lot of stuff.
True.
I'm pretty sure Amazon's #1 show is like Jack Ryan. So I watched the pilot of Jack Ryan. I was gonna watch it for Copaganda, and I couldn't go. I had to stop. I had to stop right there. I was like, I can't do this.
It's not
so
even
bad.
A good video.
To get back to Spider-Verse, I think one thing that does that is difficult with this one in particular is, I don't know, can we spoil it like slightly?
Oh yeah, so warning for anybody in the chat. We are going full spoilers. Okay. You all have had almost a week. I would genuinely stop and go watch it. It's probably the best. It might be the best superhero movie of all time. Definitely the best Spider-Man movie. One of my favorites. It's definitely up there in my top 10 like favorite films of all time.
I thought it was a masterpiece. I don't want anyone to think that I'm like hating on it or anything like that.
Yeah, let's put that disclaimer out, because I might end up releasing this as a whole thing. And the thing that always frustrates me about, there's always like bad faith video essayists critiques, but like one critique that I know is not in bad faith, but it's still a bad critique, is that we hate everything and everything is too deep. And like, no, it's because we're wired a certain way in our media consumption, that we do critique the things we love. In fact, I don't ever make content about things I don't love on some level, so this is not to dissuade you from like enjoying the movie. In fact, when you enjoy something, parroting Dr. Jared Ball, when you enjoy something, that's the main time you should interrogate why you enjoyed it so much and what was happening during that like transaction of it consuming the media,
Yeah, I think it's always telling how when we really like something, we want to be really defensive of it, and we're really willing to overlook a lot of like flaws because like I don't know, like whenever I like something a lot and people come for it, I'm always like, hey, no, this I like, but like you have to kind of like avoid that. Anyways, but one of the things that makes Spider-Verse really hard to critique in that way in terms of like its message on cops is that it doesn't like come to a close, right? It is like a part one. It does end on like a cliffhanger of sorts. So it's not really clear. Like they've kind of set the table for some more cop commentary to go on. I think that how they deal with Miles's father is going to probably play into that a big amount. They've kind of indicated that maybe he won't become captain because that's like the way you maybe don't die. Yeah. We have Gwen's dad already opting out. You don't really see a whole lot of people retire, like quitting the police.
Yeah, that's
in
new.
Media. That like never happens. I mean, I'm sure it's happened before, but I so rarely ever see that. And you never see them quitting because of because of why he quits there, because he's I don't want to.
Yeah, he engaged in the moral conflict around policing as we understand it, which is this authoritative, like he pulled a gun on his daughter,
right?
Because that was the law, right? And therein lies one of many problems. Like if you're able, in my opinion, if you're able to pull out all of the racism and capitalist origins and property rights origins out of policing, it still has a problem of authoritativeness, in my opinion.
Yeah, right. Like it is a it is an authoritative like way of creating order, right? And I understand the allure of order. I'm not trying to be all anarchist or anything necessarily, but I think that and I think that that's something that also is kind of an underrated part of the if it like a feather in the cap of Spider-Man being anti-Copaganda is the way that the council of I don't know what they're called exactly, but like the council of spider people is kind of in charge of like locking up people from other dimensions and sending them back where they belong. And the way that Miles is like, this is kind of messed up, right? Like this is not exactly the great. It kind of reminded me of the Loki finale, where it was like the time
variants were all sent to like a death planet jail.
Right. When she's like, I don't like this, I'm gonna burn it down. I was like, yeah, no, that's right. You should do that, because who the hell is this guy? Like, he doesn't have it.
like he this is kind of like the thing that I didn't think
just
about.
Showed up.
Right. And this is kind of his fault. Like, it's so funny. He called, getting into spoilers, he called Miles the anomaly, but low-key, he's an anomaly. He did some shit that he wasn't supposed to do either, but we'll see how that plays out. Somebody had a comment, but I actually think what we'll do is I finally learned how to star comments, so we're going to save that for later.
Oh,
but
cool.
I thought it was a good point.
I see it. Cool.
And so
I won't look at it yet.
Yeah, the ingrained, like the thing about Copaganda is that I've like started to notice, because I'm very new to a lot of these politics that I now espouse, right? These are not things I grew up with. These are not things I even engaged with in my 20s. These are things I had to learn. Most of my leftward drift has has been coincided with becoming a father, ironically. Because I was like, the world kind of sucks worse than I was thinking, because it was just me. But now that it's like another little person here, like, wow, let me look into this more than I was before. And so Copaganda has always looked like the police are just, and the police are good, or the police are necessary. And I feel like we didn't get any of these. We got police are human, which, if I had to make an argument against the like current oeuvre of anti-cop rhetoric in the left, especially the online left, that is something that is often left out, and it creates kind of a lazy analysis of like where police as individuals, like where they lie in this. Because the average police officer, well, I don't know about the average. There's plenty of police officers that say, here is an unskilled state job with a good pension that I can get. You know what I mean? And I just have to maybe do a little racism in the process.
Well, not just racism. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to like get
no. Feel
lost
free to
in
tell
the
me
weeds and like theoretical whatever. But I mean, the idea of, I mean, the reason that you don't support police unions is because the union is not organized against capital. It's not organized against power structures. It's organized in a way to enforce them. So like you were talking about the authoritativeness of it. It's like, yes, they are working class, but I think that the working class aesthetic has been used as a shield a lot of the times for police misconduct. Not police misconduct, because that makes it too individual, but the whole,
like,
the fundamental mission of the police is to uphold the status quo. And if the status quo is unjust, both capitalistically and class wise and race wise and gender wise, and I mean, any other things that I'm forgetting, but it is a system that's why they're called class traders, right? Or why some people on the left call them class traders, because they might be working class, but they've kind of like sold that out and are now policing their own. Yes, I do think that there is a lot of, like, obviously there are people who get involved because it is like an unskilled job and it does provide like a pension and good stuff like that. But I do think that a lot of the, I do think that that is a narrative that has also been put forward by the police themselves to make it seem like they are, we're all just working class folks
trying to make it.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make it.
Your last one, I think that was We Own the Night.
We Own the City. Yeah.
We Own the City, I think, did a really good job. For anybody that's not like familiar with, I'm going to call you Skip Intro, Jackson.
Totally fine.
Sorry.
Yeah. Most people think my name is Skip. It's fine.
Like a litany of like top tier video essays that all kind of contribute to this conversation on the depiction of policing. The last one was one of my favorites because it kind of engaged with those traps of the critique that are often left unchecked. Like, it's not hard to look at police doing cop shit and say, yeah, that's bad. But like when you engage with how all these reform efforts consistently fail, like that's more, I think, powerful. And like the reason why I think I get annoyed by the dehumanization by ACAB, right, is because ACAB breaks down. Spider-Man killed ACAB.
Okay.
You can't watch Spider-Man and say ACAB, because like clearly not ACAB in Spider-Man, except for 2099 Spider-Man, who is still very much a cop, right? But if you take a higher level critique of the concept of policing, then you're not talking about that's just Miles's dad who's just trying to do the right thing and used to be a street whatever himself, or that's Gwen's dad. Like when you get away from those individual representations of those people that just happen to be cops, but you still can critique what they serve in their different societies.
I think that so often one of the implicit things in I don't know what, I don't know how to like phrase this, but one of the things that I think makes Copaganda so pernicious is there's nothing. I think that TV and media are incredible. I've said this in some of my videos, but I call them like empathy machines or like empathy vehicles. They're so good at getting us to empathize with whoever the main character is. And, you know, sometimes that's really good and sometimes that's really bad. Like, I think that you can see, this is not a cop example, but like people would like, when Breaking Bad was at its height, people were like sending hate mail and like death threats to Anna Gunn, the actress who plays Skylar White, because they just loved Walt so much. And it's like, okay, it's not really the point of the show, but like when you spend so much time from someone's perspective, you are just going to understand them more. So I think that it's good to humanize the police, but there's also an element of not humanizing the people who are being policed. I think that that's something that The Wire does really well. There's a show called The Shield that I watched at the beginning. I feel like I always have to say.
I feel like I remember that too. Actually, it came out around the same time, didn't it?
Yeah, it was around 2002. I think it was like 2002.
Can I admit something to you and everybody just before the world? I've literally seen 2 episodes of The Wire.
I think you would like it. I don't know.
I know I would like it, but like I get tired by TV now. Wire came out while I was pledging for my fraternity.
The Wire is homework.
Yeah, it's
a homework show.
Yeah, it came out in the middle of like my sophomore, junior year of college, and I was literally joining a fraternity, partying, you know, engaging in love. I was doing too much to like sit down and like there was no appointment TV for me between 2001 and 2004. And so yeah, I just want to put that out there before you start like naming things from The Wire.
Oh yeah, I was actually gonna. Yeah, no. The thing about the Wire, I think is a really awesome TV show. I also think that it is like incredibly hard to get into because it is like kind of academic at some level. Like it's just like I've described The Wire as like the first 8 episodes of the season are them like setting up dominoes like very carefully, but they like before they set it down, they like show you the domino and they're like, look at it, enjoy every little minute, and then they like slowly place it down and then they like flick it and then you see how everything impacts each other. And it's really interesting how the systems work and how so many different people are influenced by policing, by the war on drugs, by capitalism. But also you have to sit through like 8 hours in order to like appreciate that. And sometimes that's kind of a slog, you know, like that's a tough ask.
Yeah. I've always struggled with, well, go ahead.
I was gonna say, but The Shield is a show that does not try to, like, it is not sympathetic to the police. It was created, it was originally supposed to be about the Rampart scandal in LA, which is when it was around the same time as Rodney King, but they found like this plainclothes gang unit in the LAPD was killing people, stealing their stuff, selling it on the side. They were just doing they were doing the same stuff that he does in We Own the City, basically. Yeah. It's weird how that keeps happening with all these plainclothes police units.
It's amazing.
I don't know, you know, it's
they
almost
just need
like
more training. If they get more training, they won't create insular cartels.
They definitely won't do that. They definitely, as long as they go through sensitivity training first.
Right.
But just to finish my point on The Shield, the thing that The Shield fails in is that although it is very critical of the police are, I mean, a certain sect of the police are villains in The Shield. It does still focus on the police entirely and not so much on the people who are being policed in a way that centers the police always, and you are always trying to think about how do we make this work. Like it kind of implies that necessity of the police, or the idea that this is a thing that we need and we just need to tweak it a little bit, or we need to and we can argue, not to like, I'm not saying that that's exactly what the Shield is saying, but I do think that when you focus on the police, you tend to, as main characters, and humanize them, you tend to, if you're not also balancing that with the people who are being policed, you tend to fall into a similar trap, even if you're trying to critique that.
Right. Talk to me about why training and reform doesn't work. There was one of the moments that stuck with me in Spider-Verse was Gwen says to her father in their last moment, I know you put that badge on because somebody less worthy might, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to feel about that line, but she also then kind of, from my perspective, rejects the whole concept of policing, which is what she had become. Like she joined the police, right?
Yes.
And then she like realizes the police are trash and then quits the police, but in the process explains to her father why she understands. Like this is what I think. You just give me.
I agree.
Just respond to this. She tells her father, "Hey, I joined the police to be like you, but then I realized police are kind of trash, and I was like, I understand why you do it, but I can't fuck with it, Dad." And then he's like, "No, I quit." And so that I just kind of was like, "What's
what is the takeaway here, right?"
Right, because like, and so like, I thought that was trying to say reform is what I extrapolated was like this is a commentary on like the one good cop mythos,
I think so. I think that's exactly what it is. I also think that like it's interesting because like the best cops, like the one good cop is the person who would quit, right? So like you run into this weird issue where I think that people really want to think that if we just got like different people in the system, and you see the same thing with I don't know, like girl boss like energy, where it's like, oh no, the workplace will become less sexist if we just get women in charge, and that like hasn't, I don't know, that obviously doesn't like that's not how it works, right? Because like we were saying, it doesn't really matter the humanity of the people, because it's the system, it's the structure that is inherently authoritarian. And I think that reform often, well, first of all, reform's really hard for a lot of just logistical reasons.
Right.
One, you're usually asking the police to do it themselves,
right.
Which I don't really know why we keep pretending like that's a great like, I feel like this is just very intuitive. Like it's hard for people to police themselves. That's the whole mission behind the police, right? Like their whole thing is like, we have to exist because you guys can't. So, but I don't know why we just assume that they can do it themselves, right? So there's that problem. The other problem is that it usually is it usually just involves more money going to the police. Pretty much all of the reforms that are proposed just involve like spending more taxpayer money to like body cams are a great example,
right? Or now in Atlanta, I don't know if you're aware of Cop City and what's going on in Atlanta. So they just in like 2:00 in the morning finally fully
authorized
authorized $67 million for this training facility for better training. That it's
So I was doing some reading on Cop City this week because of that, and it's really it's a really interesting. I don't know. It's not interesting. It's horrific. But the idea that I was getting in an argument with my dad this week too about how he was basically being like, people don't protest enough or something, and I was like, okay, well. Okay, so George Floyd dies in 2020. Rayshard Brooks is killed by the police in 2020. Nothing happens to those guys. They're indicted, but then they aren't charged. And the reform efforts that have come about since then are to build Cop City, basically, right? Like that's the response. The response has not been let's stop doing this. It's how do we better insulate the police when they do kill people? How do we now train them to respond to like riots, right? And I was looking into like some of the financials of Cop City, and I did not like realize how it's like $31 million of taxpayer money and then like $67 million of like also kind of like pension money that's being invested through like these police funds and stuff like that. And that's the response. Like that's the reform effort. The same thing happened with like body cams and other stuff like in Baltimore. To go back to We Own the City, they did this whole thing called a consent decree. And I don't want to like just relitigate my video there, but like for anyone who's not familiar, a consent decree is like the harshest form of federal reform. That the federal government comes in and they're like, we're putting you under notice and we're gonna, we'll pull funding if you don't do this, if you don't do our reforms. But they like take forever to enact. They are kind of toothless. Like if you don't do it, they're like whatever. They can like
fire all the police.
Yeah, exactly. The police are really good at knowing at unionizing essentially against workers. But that's anyways, yeah. So they make it very difficult. The police really don't want to change. As a structure, like I think some cops are okay with like small little itty bitty reforms, but they don't want to do anything that would jeopardize, the police as a job. They don't want to do anything that would lead to a reduction in armed forces or anything like that. So it just becomes very difficult to actually do any kind of meaningful reform.
There's a very like, feudal lord element there. Like the police, they work as the dogs, the armed, especially now as the militarization grows, they have a role in the structure that is extremely valuable and allows for them to agitate minimally. Ironically, it minimally agitate for their needs, which means they're always going to work against any change to that structure, because that means a change to, what they get out of the equation. Cop City in particular, like I just posted, put the comment up. It's very much a corporate machine because Atlanta is the jewel of the South, and we have every major corporation is here. The gentrification of the city over the last 15 years has been bananas. And
most surveilled city in America too.
Most surveilled city, right? And like you best believe that Coca-Cola, well, and not just best believe, you can look it up. Coca-Cola, Lockheed, Chick-fil-A, all these companies invested in Cop City, and then they're going to have contracts with the development. They're going to have contracts with who gets to be vendors in it. You know what I'm saying? Like, all the cops are probably going to wear Nikes. Like it's all kinds.
I think they're building like a film studio nearby for like, or possibly. There already is one or something.
There's a film studio. Well, there's the area they're in is it's not just that one area. It's like it's connected to a lot of stuff. So there's a film studio not that far from it, from where it's supposed to be. And maybe there'll be another one. Maybe there's a connection. I don't know. We half of Marvel, Asgard, and Wakanda.
That's exactly what I was.
That's the joke I always say to people. Right, made in Georgia. If you've watched a Marvel movie, you've seen this line at the end of it. The last two decades.
I mean, a lot of stuff's been. Georgia's been like. I mean, I grew up in. I went to school for film, so like the three places to go when I was getting out were New York, L.A. And then Atlanta was blowing up at the time. Yeah. That was back in like 2010, 2008.
Yeah. We're not unionized yet. And that's the thing I've been hearing people talk about, is that Hollywood's been coming here because they can take advantage of
Oh yeah, no.
ununionized film labor. And so when we unionize, is Hollywood going to run to New Orleans, which they already like do a lot of movies in New Orleans too, but getting further off topic.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it becomes a whole, yeah, because nobody wants to lose those jobs, that revenue, all that stuff, but it's
so
yeah.
back
Also, the people who are like the corporate people who are funding Cop City are also like, they're also like lobbying against minimum wage efforts. They're like, I was reading something like the CEO of, I think it's like Inspire Food Groups or something. They're like one of the three major investors, but the CEO is also on like the board of the police fund that's doing that, and their employees are like some of the highest percentage of like employees that are on food stamps in the country. So like they don't care about like the idea of like, to go back to Spider-Verse, it's not protecting anybody. I guess it's protecting capital, really, right, is what it's all about, is protecting those interests and keeping often workers in line.
Yeah, that's the one thing. I had a bit of a blow up with some people a couple of weeks ago around Cop City. And in the aftermath, people were all spouting the idea that more cops make safer neighborhoods. And like, I think so there's like research that shows that, right? But people aren't considering what that means. That's literally a police state.
Yeah. Like, there's also like research that shows the opposite. Like, crime is such a complicated topic, and it deals with so many socioeconomic issues.
Right.
That, yeah.
We know you can prove that if you put a police officer in the corner of every street in a lower income neighborhood, that there'll be a reduction in crime because people will be scared to leave their houses.
Sure. Yeah.
You can also prove that if you put healthcare facilities and youth support systems on every corner in the neighborhood, that you reduce crime because people have access to those resources. But like that then creates all these other problems for the status quo, because now capital that was being amassed by the 1% and corporate people saving their money on labor is now being used to benefit actual people, which creates their deficits and their bottom lines. And the thing that frustrates me the most is not just like the scary thing about what's happening in Spider-Man, as I'm like thinking about it, is that it feels like it's going to come down to an individualist conversation around policing, right? Miguel, the Spider Cop, 2099, he made a bad individual decision. And then Gwen's dad made a bad individual decision, then a good individual decision. And then Miles's dad, he's one of the good ones and we need him. Versus the concept of Spider Cop, much like the concept of police as a whole, is fundamentally a problem for like most of the people involved in the equation.
I think that, one of the hard things about talking about this is that they haven't totally like finished their story, right? Like they end on a cliffhanger. Who knows which direction they want to go in? But the seeds are definitely there for what you said, but the seeds are also definitely there for a more radical message. I think there was like, I feel like this was one of the more, I feel like every time anarchism as a concept is introduced in film or media or TV, it's often like either a joke or villain, like in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier people who were like, let's get rid of nations. And they're like, gotta kill those people, right? And
not like this. That was the speech at the end.
Oh, jeez. I don't know what people are calling him. Hobie. Yeah. He was pretty like explicitly, I quit the Spider Cops, and also like anarchism is like maybe a good idea. He helps both Gwen and Miles. I'm sure that he will be back in the final movie. I mean, he's voiced by Daniel Kaluuya, right?
So and he's the breakout star of the film, at least in where I'm from my perspective.
Yeah, so I think that there are definitely seeds there for a more radical message in terms of defunding or abolishing police, a more systemic kind of critique.
Or he saves Spider Cop.
Or he said, yeah. I mean, you could go either way. I think that we also have. I think that it's probably unrealistic, or I got in this like argument about like Succession with a friend, because I was like, I didn't like love how they, not to like Succession spoilers or derail the conversation, but I was like, I feel like this is not like a strong enough critique of capitalism in the end. And he was like, well, what show is doing that? I was like, well, no one's doing that, but they were close, you know. I wanted and I can see that same kind of idea here with Spider-Verse. It's probably unrealistic to think that they are going to come up with an entirely new worldview that exists, like a post police abolition world, and kind of paint that or model that for people, because like we said, so many stories are just like the cops just are so good at you know, good guy versus bad guy, good guy wins, status quo,
justice is served.
Yeah, and it kind of fills that hero's journey, right? Like we're back at the beginning, but we learned a lesson along the way. And I don't know if they're going to be able to like pull that off, because quite like it's really radical. But I think that they are definitely at the very least teasing or introducing audiences to that idea, and that's worth something.
Yeah, it's and that's kind of what makes it scary overall, in that, you know, the recuperation of you know, radical and leftist messages in modern media, with Marvel in particular, although technically this is Sony, but like Marvel in particular has been at the forefront of introducing radical concepts and then, you know, sanding off the edges to make them palatable and make them as less radical as possible, while presenting radicalism and presenting, you know, again, like I don't know if you watch my Black Panther video, kind of like how they shoehorn in the CIA and they pull out all these tropes of, you know, revolutionary, anti-colonial, you know, movements, and then say, but also like all Wakandas matter. You know what I'm saying? And everybody gets vibranium because we're all one tribe.
It's kind of, the example I always think of is just like when Urban Outfitters started selling Che Guevara t-shirts. Like, it's just like, yeah, that's not, I don't think he would have been down with that. Like, I don't think that was what he stood for. But yeah, I mean, Capital has an incredible ability to co-opt any, I mean, that's its great strength, I think.
Right.
Is its ability to co-opt any message in service of itself, right? Like, they don't really care if you are railing against capitalism, as long as you're still buying the anti-capitalist flags off of Amazon, you know?
Right. Yeah, look, that's as long as you're doing the thing they need you to do. That's the thing, you know, like I got introduced to punk in high school. Never got big into it. Shout out again to Lil Bill, who like is living his best life now that Black punk has been entered into mainstream relevance. And he also pointed out that point about how anarchists and punks are either jokes or villains. And suddenly we have an anarchist that's the coolest character in the movie, and whose motives who has arrived at the appropriate a decision-making process well before anyone else. So I
am curious to see if they play off of his, because he kind of mentions that he, like, that's the canon event, right? Like, everyone has dealt with a police captain close to them who died, and he kind of like points at Hobie and he's like, "You too?" And he's like, "Yeah, like, what of it," or whatever. But I would kind of like to see how that played out, because he does not seem like someone who would be close to any police officers.
Well, if you caught the Easter egg, shout out to Veritas Joe, who's the first person I see pointed out. He has blue laces on his boots, and blue laces represent that you've killed a cop.
Okay.
And so there's, I don't know, they've left, and this is kind of and we'll wrap after this. The reason why I definitely want to talk about the Copaganda in Spider-Man is because it's either going to be the first legitimately transgressive commentary on policing, because we have plenty of everybody, like, capitalism is like you said, they're fine. Yeah, like call me a asshole, whatever. Just make sure you buy some popcorn and like hold up your reward for your anti-capitalist movie, right? But nobody's really went at policing. Right? Nobody's went at, and they're obviously not going at it super hard, but it's in there. And so they're either going to land this like biggest plane upside down on like a football field, or is going to be the biggest betrayal of these politics that we've ever seen. And I'm just so nervous.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely possible. I mean, it's definitely in play. I think that maybe I'm just maybe I'm just hopeful, but
please be hopeful, please.
Yeah,
yes. I need to hear that. I need to hear that.
I think that there are enough seeds there, and they've gone out of their way to be as transgressive as they have. I totally get the understanding to be like, or I totally get the urge to be like, how is this going to be then co-opted into reinforcing the same status quo? And that totally might be a thing. And I think that even if you want, I mean, you can take like a more structural view, a materialist view, and be like, I mean, no commercial film could ever actually critique the police and Capitol, because you are ultimately still benefiting from that. Like,
I won't do that shit.
Yeah, I think that's like a bit, I don't know. Then you're kind of like, well, then the only, I don't know. Then you end up like, what can you do, right?
Watch. So like, I don't like, we know, but I want to talk about it. So like, shut up, go over there.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that, yeah, I mean, it could totally turn into a betrayal. I think at the very least, even if it does do that, even if it does turn against all the things that it said in this movie still exists. Right. And at least for some period of time, it exists in like before the finale, right? Before they come to a conclusion. So at least all of these ideas, like the ones, even if they turn against Hobie in the finale, which doesn't feel like what they're going to do, but maybe they do. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of like the most pessimistic version. Like they turn against him, they turn against whatever, and all of the messages they said, we're still going to have like 2 years of this being the final message that's out there. Right.
We can just declare the next one non-canon.
Right. I mean, it worked for Star Wars, so
facts. So yeah, that's real. And I appreciate you rejecting doomerism in the moment, because that's something I struggled with. Obviously, this isn't real doomerism. This is just being pessimistic. Yeah. But you get my point, though. It's important. Shout out to all the young people in my community and this community as a whole who consistently have hope, present hope, and like create hope through their actions, because there's plenty of reason to have that. You know what I'm saying? And you're very much correct in that. And the reason why I wanted to even talk to you is because I wanted to make sure I wasn't off in my own analysis and thinking this is propaganda, but like not like this is such a higher level of it that it almost escapes. You almost got to come up with another term.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? This is closer to like an analysis of policing.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
It's kind of like, I would definitely say that it is, even if it is not like anti-Copaganda or even if it is kind of a form of Copaganda, it's certainly like, at least right now, where we are right now, say nothing of where it might go in the future, it definitely seems less explicit. Like it's not like Law and Order. It's not Blue Bloods. It's not this just like pro cop thing. It's at least introducing the argument in a way that it is at least being critical, right? It's not saying, it's not just accepting it at face value. It's at least dealing with those arguments, those criticisms of the police. Marvel does that sometimes. They'll like introduce, like they'll like use some of those criticisms and then use them to like ultimately uphold whatever they were doing in the first place. But I don't think that they ever deal with them nearly as seriously. I'm talking about like the MCU movies. Obviously, this was made in association with Marvel, whatever. But I think that this was more good faith grappling with a lot of those criticisms of the police, from the anarchism, from the way Gwen talks to her dad, even the way that they kind of reject the Spider Society, and even I think some of the ways that Miles and his father have interacted. He definitely feels like a good apple kind of trope. But I don't know. We saw Gwen's dad leave. Maybe Miles's dad leaves, and maybe that's how he doesn't die.
One interesting thing that I wanted to get your perspective on before we run, because I literally have to like run to the bathroom. Is the end world. So last spoiler warning for anybody that just got here. We were talking about the very end of the movie. So at the end of the movie, they get to Spider-Man 42's world, who doesn't exist, and it's like, and this is now I'm starting to turn on my radar. You see what's happening here?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
They get to Spider-Man 42's world, and they go outside, and it's like Mad Max, and Miles points out that no Spider-Man is here. Right. And then they have a mural of Spider-Man's dad, which people like critiqued as like, that's not.
Yeah, that was weird. I agree, that was weird.
So and therein lies, I guess, the opportunity for them to turn things on their heads, because if they're go ahead. I don't
want you to get me wrong. There are plenty of opportunities for them to totally turn into just hardcore propaganda again. Like that's always there, because that's so easy, and audiences are so primed for are so primed to just accept that that idea of propaganda and just like upholding the status quo. And it is like a lawless world, and I'm also interested to see what they do with version or 42 World 42 Miles. Because I'm not sure if this is a look, if circumstances, turning to a life of crime is more a matter of circumstance than the usual, like, you're just a bad
behavior, bad apple stuff.
And you see that even with Spot too, right? Like to a degree, he's like, and I think that one of the things that I have always liked about Spider-Man, and not so much about the MCU Spider-Man, who is very much a cop, is this idea that like Spider-Man is like trying to help people. He stays local. He is trying to do things that are helping people. I grew up with like the early 90s animated Spider-Man.
Friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
And part of his thing, and part of this is just because like censorship, but like he was always trying to like help whoever he was fighting. Like he's never trying to just like put them in jail. He's like they're usually the on the bad end of some like crazy genetic mutation thing that they did not mean to do, and he's like, look, how can we help you, man? Like I don't want to be doing this. You don't want to be doing this. He's like trying to help Eddie Brock come out of Venom. He's like trying to help Morbius.
Gwen was trying to help her Peter.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is something that I've really liked about Spider-Man in the past, and I feel like we've kind of gotten away from that in more modern iterations, and I'm interested to see if that's kind of somewhere that they return to in this version,
right?
In this trilogy. I'll let
All
you go
right.
to the bathroom.
Yeah, Skip. We're gonna roll. I appreciate you being here. This is a good conversation. I'm probably gonna just chunk this all together. I don't know if I'm gonna separate this out because it felt like a too cohesive and good of a conversation. But thank everybody for being here. You want to give a quick shout out and just tell people where they can find you, all your promotional socials, et cetera,
Yeah,
et cetera.
Skip Intro on YouTube and Skip Intro YT on Twitter for as long as I choose to do that, and that's it. That's I don't.
Indeed. Also, Skip Intro is on Nebula. Are you on
Nebula. Yeah,
yes, Nebula Gang. So those of you who have Nebula through maybe my content or someone else's, you can go watch all of his stuff ad free, all the good stuff. You got any originals on Nebula?
I don't have any originals, but there are some longer versions of stuff that I had to cut down for the YouTube censors.
Yeah, I've been doing that regularly.
So there's some of that stuff. So that's cool.
Dope. All right, appreciate everyone for being here. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Peace and blessings. Peace to you, Skip. I'm about to actually just jump right out this back.